In this video, I'm trying something a little bit different. I'm setting aside my Copics and I'm setting a challenge for myself to create an artwork using this. It's a 4-in-1 ballpoint pen. It's got some cool colors. You've got your red, black, blue, but this one's got a neon green, which I'm going to utilize sparingly, but I think it's going to be pretty cool. So I just want to make this video for something a little bit different. I think as an artist, it's important to kind of mix it up. You can get stuck in a rut doing the same thing over and over, and I feel like I've been doing that a bit lately. So I wanted to try something different. And I think this is a really cool challenge because a lot of people tell me on social media, you know, they want to try Copics, and I love Copics, but they're expensive, and realistically, a lot of people can't afford them. So I just want to encourage people to create art with whatever equipment you can. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can get these ballpoint pens for like $1 or something. They're super cheap, but you can still do something really cool with them. So in this video, I'm going to be trying to draw a slight variation of a Fortnite character, a skin. Yeah, I know it's Fortnite clickbait. I'm going there, don't judge me, but I'm going to try and make it really cool. I'm also going to read a Creepypasta horror story, so you guys who enjoy the stories, don't worry, I'm going to get into one of them in just a minute, and it's a really cool story, so I hope you stick around for that and enjoy watching the process. I just want to thank everyone who's come to my channel and subscribed lately. I really appreciate the support, and I'm so grateful that you guys see the time and effort that comes into these videos. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps out my channel and motivates me to keep making content for you guys. So it's always appreciated when you guys support what I do. With that being said, I'm going to jump into the story, and I hope you guys enjoy. Put on the headphones, dim the lights, and enjoy. ANTRAN. It was a warm summer back in the mid-70s. I was driving home from my logging company after a long shift when I had to make a stop at the local garbage tip to drop off some old desks my mother had given us. Something caught the corner of my eye as I bent down, and upon closer inspection was shocked to see what I originally thought was a plastic doll. A plastic outer shell with metal limbs, and more shockingly, a humanoid face with cold, dark eyes. I'll be honest to say, I was curious at the time, and incredibly impressed with the workmanship, so I didn't think twice before placing it carefully along the back seat of my car, and took it home. My son's interest was almost as intense as mine, and we bonded over the course of a few days, opening it up, looking at its circuitry and seeing if anything had been misplaced or broken. Eventually, to our surprise, the being, or android, seemed to come to life. Its eyes displayed a somewhat sentient tint to them. Its limbs turned, its hands gripped, and after a few moments, it managed to stand on its own accord. Needless to say, we were scared, yet fascinated. Who could have created such a wonderful and remarkable piece of work? I thought to myself. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I realized wasn't a toy or a doll. It showed incredible signs of intelligence and thinking ability. It learned to do everyday things, such as taking the trash out and playing with my son's toys. He even had a favourite, a small red car that he'd drive alongside the kitchen counters. It learned to mimic our ways, trying to eat with a fork despite having no digestive system, moving its mouth despite lacking the ability to speak. I knew this was something else. Perhaps a military piece of hardware, or a private project. I knew I should have handed him in, but when I watched my boy play with it so happily, his face lit up. I couldn't do it. He's always been so lonely. This was one of his only friends. What kind of father would I be to deny him of the right to happiness? It couldn't hurt to allow him to keep it for a while. We named him ANTRAN, which was the print in capitals written in small font across his back. A few months passed quickly, and family life seemed to be improving. He was one of us. My lad's grades improved, his mood improved, everything was getting better. Until one evening in July. I was sitting in my armchair with a beer, watching television. My boy and ANTRAN had knelt down on the rug, play fighting with one another, as boys do, when suddenly my attention was drawn to a loud gasp. I looked down and saw my child gripping his arm. "What's wrong, Adam?" I asked. He rolled up his sleeve, and on his arm was a large red mark covering his forearm. "ANTRAN pinched me," he replied in a shaky voice. The mark was indeed red. It would soon bruise into a swollen purple lump. My fatherly instincts took over me, and like a parent telling off a naughty child, I shouted at the android. Its cold, metallic face, for a moment, seemed to show genuine sadness and sorrow, as though it didn't know its own strength, as though it was sorry. Its lips moved. Whether it was trying to muster up the words to apologize through language, or merely copy what I was doing, we will never know. Later on in the evening, I apologized for shouting, told it everything was okay, and thought nothing of it. A few weeks later, my child came into my room. It must have been early morning. My slumber was interrupted by the gentle creaking of my bedroom door. "Dad," he whispered. "Yes, son," I replied. "It keeps looking at me." What? What does?" I asked him through tired eyes. "ANTRAN. He keeps looking at me from the end of my bed." His voice trembled, fearful. I could tell something wasn't right. I noticed him rubbing his other arm, and immediately called him over, pulling up his sleeve. My heart sank. More bruises. Must have been 4, 5, all the way up his arms. "Take off your shirt, Adam," I asked, trying to keep calm. I could feel a cocktail of emotions rising within me. Panic, fear, anger. He took off his shirt. As the waist pulled over his small head, my heart sank further, and my eyes welled up. Before me, my son stood, his small frame coated in bruises, different sizes, different shades of browns and purples. Immediately, I got up and stormed to Adam's room. Nothing. I shouted at the top of my lungs for the being, looking under the bed, out of the closed bedroom window. Nothing. Suddenly, a loud knock from above us. Then hard footsteps. "It's in the loft," I whispered, my eyes to the heavens. As I walked down the corridor, I noticed the walls on either side of me were coated in scratches, all the way up to the now swinging string that leads to the small loft door. Slowly, I pulled it down, telling my scared son to stay where he was. The ladder fell down, and I climbed up. Taking hold of the torch we left on the side of the opening, I turned it on. My eyes began scouring the loft, only to find the small window we had in there to be smashed. It had escaped. Immediately, I considered calling the emergency services, but who's going to believe me? A sentient metallic being hurting my child? They'd take one look at the bruises, and they'd have me locked up for abuse. I had no choice but to keep quiet. Weeks, then months passed. Every time we went outside, we noticed ever-increasing signs of ANTRAN's presence. The familiar scratch marks alongside the bricking of my home. Plants had been disturbed, patches of mud leading up to the windows. I feared for my son, taking him to and from school, never letting him out of my sight. What had caused this sudden hostility towards us? Had we done it wrong? Was it my shouting? I found myself speaking out loud in the evenings, apologising to the walls, to an empty room, in the hopes ANTRAN would hear me, hoping he would stop the taunting, the endless stalking of my home. But my attempts were in vain. If I had known what would come, I wouldn't have slept that night. My sleep once again disturbed, though this time by a blood-curdling scream. My eyes started open, and immediately, almost as a natural instinct, I rushed to my son's room. It was too late. The room had been turned upside down. Everything was on the floor, the bed sheets ripped, and his window smashed. I burst into tears, screaming at the top of my lungs for my son to come back. I called the police, telling them my son had been kidnapped. They asked if I had seen the culprit. I lied and said I hadn't, hoping the images of my son would be enough. Like they'd believe that this doll was sentient, harmful. For the first few days, I cried myself to sleep, sobbing like a child. Life wasn't worth living anymore. I wish I had never found that thing. I betrayed my son's trust in me as a father to protect him, and now I pay the price. It was a September dawn. I sat in my armchair, drinking, when I heard the pantry door creak open. "Adam?" I called, rushing to the kitchen. Again, nothing. Except for there, on the kitchen counter, was ANTRAN's favourite red toy car. jumped onto the marble foyer as I ran into the kitchen. I looked behind me and saw him sprinting towards me. I rushed for the open door in front of me and then felt nothing under my feet. I fell down the stairs and into the basement as my camera that was around my neck slid away from me.